starting us off at number 10 is King Tutankhamun Part 1. Now back in the day, and this was done a lot in ancient Egypt, people would place curses on tombs as a safety measure. This was done because if any of the possessions inside a tomb were disturbed, then the person buried or wrapped up inside wouldn't have had a peaceful afterlife. But that fact clearly didn't stop many Egyptologists, including the Earl of Carnarvon, George Herbert, who funded the group dig in the Valley of the Kings where King Tutankhamun's tomb was found. George and his daughter traveled to Egypt where they were going to be present when the tomb was officially opened by the Department of Antiquities. However, the father-daughter duo, along with an assistant, went into the tomb multiple times, which was just unauthorized. They even made a breach in the corner of the tomb's doorway and looked inside, and this was the first time modern people had stepped foot in the tomb. Journalists reported that the words "death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king" were inscribed near the door. A few months later, the Earl died from an infected mosquito bite. I don't want to say it's karma, but it was karma. Now I know that could be completely unlinked, but a similar lesion was found on the pharaoh's cheek during an autopsy, which is just sus as hell. And to top it all off, all the lights in the Earl's house just blacked out the moment he died with zero explanation whatsoever. So it's safe to say death really did come on swift wings, didn't it? But
Coming in at number 9, we have the Shugborough inscription. The thing is about this tomb message is that we have no idea what it says. The Shugborough monument can be found in the grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire in England. The monument depicts the shepherds of Arcadia, in which shepherds stand around a tomb. Now the monument contains a very cryptic message that reads OUOSVAVV, and this is framed by the letters D and M. A lot of people that think that this is a code, and the monument is regularly hailed as one of the world's top unsolved ciphers. Adding to the mystery, fingers of the stone's figurines touch the letters N and R on the phase et in Arcadia EGO. So what does this mean? Some of the world's top minds, Charles Darwin and Charles Dickens included, have actually failed to solve the text. Coming in at number 8, we have the cursed tablets. In 2003, 4 cursed tablets were found in the grave of a young woman who died around 2,400 years ago in Greece. Brilliant. Back in the day, it seems that cursed tablets were very popular, and people would inscribe curses on metal and offer them to the gods. Burying tablets with the dead was believed to give the tablets direct access to the gods, who would then decide to do the curse's bidding. The curses were aimed at then local innkeepers Demetrios and Fangoria. One of the curses found in the grave read, "Cast your hate upon Fangora and Demetrios and their tavern and their property and their possessions. I will bind my enemy in blood and ashes with all the dead." Blimey. Another one of the curses found in the grave wished a dog ear curse upon them. Of course. From dog curses to donkey curses up at number 7. The Egyptians, as we know, were a scary bunch when it came to protecting their final resting places. Well, it seems that a donkey curse was famously found on the tomb of Der El Bari Graffito. The donkey curse invoked the god Seth, a donkey who would rape those who violated the tomb. We hear a lot about how the curse of King Tut came true, but we have no idea if the curse here came true because nobody wants to admit that they got harassed by a donkey, do they? Coming in at number 6, we have Amenhotep's shopping list. The ancient Egyptians were so dramatic, including Amenhotep, son of Hapu, who died in 1300 BC. In life, he was a priest and a scribe, and a lover of melodrama, I bet. He inscribed one of the more inventive curses that I've ever read on the doors of his final resting place. This curse actually kind of made me laugh. It reads like a shopping list of plague and pestilence. He wrote, "He who enters this tomb will lose their earthly possessions and honours, be incinerated in a furnace, in excretion of rites, capsize, drown at sea, have no successors, receive no tomb or funerary offerings of their own, and their bodies would decay because they will starve and have no sustenance, and their bones will perish." Good! Great! You get a car. No, you get a car. No, you get a car. Plagues, plagues everywhere. Coming in at number 5, we have this warning. I can't think of anything scarier than going to visit the tombstone of a loved one and finding these tasteless warning signs. Councillors in Plymouth in England placed garish yellow warning signs on the graves that they had deemed unsafe or hazardous. Basically, they were worried that they were going to topple over at some point. I'm all about preventing some danger, but honestly, bright yellow signs that cover the name of the person buried, for me it's a bit of an eyesore. Mourner Paul Ford found his grandparents' grave had one of the signs on and spoke out about how disrespectful it was, and how the message could have been at the back of the grave. True. Coming in at number 4, we have spooky old Midnight Mary. It seems that a very scary message can be found on a grave at the Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven. The inscription is actually a very ghostly warning. The grave belongs to Mary E. Hart, who died under strange circumstances in 1872. Around the top of her grave reads, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." It seems that Mary was considered somewhat of a witch in her era, and some even say that she haunts the New Haven graveyard to this day, taking souls to the underworld with her if they're by her grave at the stroke of midnight. Of course, these are probably just urban legends made up to match her spooky gravestone, although I still wouldn't want to be around at midnight just in case. You were waiting for him, here he is. Coming in at number 3, we have King Tut's terror. Do not disturb an ancient Egyptian tomb. Message received loud and clear, although it only took the deaths of 6 people for us to realise. Now, a lot of you will be familiar with the curse of the pharaohs and what happened with Tutankhamun's grave, so I will just recap really quickly. In 1922, Egyptologist Lord Carnarvon and archaeologist Howard Carter were the first to enter King Tut's tomb. Carnarvon died from a mosquito bite to the cheek shortly after the tomb was open. A similar mark was also found on the king. George J. Gold, Audrey Hepburn, Hugh Evelyn White, Aaron Ember and Archibald Douglas Reed also died shortly after coming into contact with the tomb or someone who had entered. It seems that outside the burial chamber was an inscription that read, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Also found in the tomb was a warning on a bracelet that read, "Cursed be he who moves my body, to him shall come fire, water and pestilence." Now, the man on the receiving end of this bracelet actually did have his house burned down. Then when it was rebuilt, it was hit by a flood. Interesting. Coming in at number 2, we have a curse upon the bullies. Well, Mary of Wallingport, Massachusetts certainly got the last word, didn't she? It seems that Mary C. Delancey was a nuisance in her community. She believed her neighbours were up to no good and she would shine lights into their properties. She owned a lot of cats and would spend hours feeding pigeons, which is kinda sweet, but it also seems like she was quite the recluse. She felt her neighbours bullied her and she was unwilling to let bygones be bygones. In one final act of revenge, she wrote on her tomb, "May eternal damnation be upon those in Wallingport who without knowing me have maliciously vilified me. May the curse of God be upon them and theirs." Cool. Just curse the whole community then. Cheers, babe. Mary died in 1985, and it seems that her curse got lost in the post, as the people of Wallingport don't believe they've come across any misfortune whatsoever. The woman who actually moved into Mary's old home said to a local newspaper that the curse didn't bother her. She said, "I was frankly saddened for this lady who must have had so much turmoil in her life that she'd put this on her gravestone." Another member of the community wrote, "Nobody even takes it seriously, of course. It's a funny thing. We all laugh about it." Ooh, rough ride for old Mary. Finally, coming into number 1, one tomb that should never have been disturbed, we have Tamerlane's terror. Did it unleash Hitler? Maybe. Tamerlane founded the Timurid Empire in the 14th century, stretching across Central Asia and Persia. Tamerlane was also known as Timur and was buried in modern-day Uzbekistan, and his burial chamber was infiltrated by Soviets. Written on the wall, there was a very scary message indeed. "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble. Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Now, Tamerlane was indeed terrible. The Middle East and parts of India were ransacked with their populations massacred. So, did they heed this warning? Did they hell? Soviet anthropologists dug him up, and what happened? Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military operation of all time. Now, a lot of people were killed, to just put that extremely lightly. When Stalin found out, he actually had Tamerlane reburied with full Islamic rites. Days later, the Soviets eventually and finally won a battle at the Battle of Stalingrad. Hitler did continue to plague the world for another 3 years though. Is this why?
Starting off at number 10 now, we have King Tut's curse. This is perhaps one of the most famous curses of all time that we're starting off with. In 1922, Egyptologist Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of Kings, Egypt. To this day, it remains the only intact and complete royal burial of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh found in modern times. An inscription on the wall reads, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." They ignored this warning. Carter and his team entered and began to remove the priceless artifacts. 6 weeks later, one of Carter's associates died from a mosquito bite. Soon after, relatives of the team began to die in mysterious circumstances. One famous example involved their secretary being found dead in her bed, which then drove her father to commit suicide. In total, there have been some 11 deaths linked to the so-called King Tut's curse, and some say they will never end unless the tomb's treasure is returned.
Coming in at number 9 is King Tutankhamun Part 2. Now this tomb is probably the most cursed one of all time, which is why honestly I could make like 9 parts to this tomb, but I won't. But I do think it deserves 2 though, to shed light on how cursed it truly was. Now first we have Sir Bruce Ingham. Howard Carter, one of the archaeologists that found the tomb, gave Bruce a paperweight which looked like a mummified hand wearing a bracelet. On it was the phrase, "Cursed be he who moves my body." His house burned down soon after, and after finishing rebuilding it, it was destroyed again by a flood. Then we move on to Hugh Evelyn White. He visited the tomb, and after seeing literally 24 other excavators die, Hugh hung himself and left a suicide note behind. On it, it said, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." And he wrote that in his own blood. And there's like 30 more stories where that came from, so I hope that puts into perspective how much opening King Tutankhamun's tomb screwed everyone over, and rightfully so. I mean, he did warn you guys. That's none of my business. At number 8 we have The Unknown Tomb. Back in 1699, Louis Penisher wrote a book called The Treatise on Embalming, and in the book he told the story of a very precarious Polish man. The man had bought 2 tombs with mummies inside them from Alexandria, hoping to study them for medicinal purposes. Okay, first off, I didn't even know you could just buy mummies and tombs just like that, like surely that isn't legal. Either way, as he was sailing back home with the mummies in tow, he started being haunted by 2 ghosts that magically just appeared on the boat, and of course he knew the ghosts had to be the mummies. He started seeing visions of 2 figures come at him and was losing his grip on reality. The weather at sea was starting to get a lot worse as well, and so freaking out he threw the mummies overboard, and peace was very quickly restored. Filling our number 7 slot is Seth I. Now back in 1833, German archaeologist Carl Richard Lepsius went to various lectures on the decipherment of the Egyptian language and then travelled to Egypt. There he undertook a dig in the Valley of the Kings and found a complete undiscovered tomb, which was rare since most of them had been found by then. The tomb belonged to Seth I, and Carl took a full-on entire pillar from the tomb back to Berlin with him. As soon as he got back though, he became sick almost immediately and was rushed to the hospital, where he found out the right side of his body was fully paralyzed. If that wasn't bad enough, he was diagnosed with cancer not long after, and it's believed that the paralysis came to be because of him stealing the pillar from the tomb. Now I love how people think they can just take whatever the hell they want from these tombs and nothing is gonna happen to them. Like, it doesn't work like that, buddy. Something will happen to you. You take a pillar, you get paralyzed. It's a dog-eat-dog world, people. Savage. Savagery. Savagery. Snakery. Just push it all away. Now at number 6 is the annual occurrence. Renowned Egyptologist Zahi Hawass was doing some excavation at the Kom Abu Billo site, which is the location of various tombs. He was transporting some artifacts from these tombs to a different location, and that was the day things changed for him forever. On that same day as he was transporting the items, his aunt died. Then a year later on the same day, his uncle died. The following year on the same day again, his cousin died. So there had now been 3 deaths, 3 years in a row on the same frickin' day. Coincidence? Most definitely not. Newspapers around Egypt pointed to the curse of the pharaohs for being behind the deaths, whereas Hawass himself said the truth is that there is no curse of the pharaohs. Ooh, unpopular opinion maybe perhaps. Speculation. Coming in at number 5 is the curious case of George. So Egyptology professor George Reisner was quite a big name back in the 1930s and 40s because he discovered the tomb of Khufu's mother back in the day and basically made media history when he delivered a worldwide broadcast from inside the king's chamber. That's a flex if I ever saw one. Like, I thought I flexed, that is a flex. Either way, by the spring of 1942, Reisner was working inside the pyramid when he suddenly collapsed. Now the thing about George was that he was almost entirely blind, yet he was extremely vocal and articulate and hadn't mentioned anything about feeling sick that day. His team had to drag his body out of the pyramid paralyzed, and he died very shortly after. No one knows why or how he died, how he became paralyzed, but by now I think it's safe to say the curse of the pharaohs got him. Got him. Gani! At number 4 is the Tomb Raider, and no, I'm not talking about Lara Croft, although I really wish I was. So back in 2004, a German man was visiting the Valley of the Kings in Egypt and stole a relic from King Tutankhamun's tomb. I mean, international law would call it stealing. He, on the other hand, called it a souvenir, so I mean, that's none of my business. Stealing. Either way, when he got back to Germany, the man came down with a horrible fever and fatigue despite being 100% healthy days prior. The fever turned into paralysis and soon death. The man's stepson was convinced that the relic his dad had stolen was cursed and returned it to Egypt's Supreme Council for Antiquities, hoping that that would allow his dad's soul to rest in peace. I mean, honestly, if you're disrespectful enough to steal an artifact from a grave, then does your soul really deserve to rest in peace? Didn't think so. Next. Filling our number 3 slot is CASIMIR IV JAGIELLON, and I know there are many pronunciations of his name, the Lithuanian version, the Polish version, like there's many, so don't come for me, honestly. Now, Casimir had a bunch of royal titles, but the main ones were the Grand Duke of Lithuania and the King of Poland, both of which he upheld from the 1440s till his death. He died in 1492 at the age of 64, and his remains were put inside a tomb and sealed inside the chapel of the Wawel Castle. Fast forward nearly 500 years later, a team of 12 archaeologists ventured to Poland to open his tomb, and when they did, they found his rotten corpse in there, which sounds pretty anticlimactic, like what else were they expecting to find there? Either way, days after they opened it, 4 of the 12 archaeologists died, and 2 years later only 2 people from the team were still alive. One of the survivors was a microbiologist who found fungi in the royal insignia taken from the tomb, and this fungi specifically produces aflatoxins that are fatal if they touch your skin or if you breathe them in. So it wasn't the tomb's curse specifically that killed all these people, but I mean it was the curse of the fungi, and arguably that is more scary, you guys. Now at number 2 is the curse of Tamerlane. Now Timur or Tamerlane was a Turco-Mongol Persianate conqueror and the founder of the Timurid Empire, which is basically modern day Iran. Big dude with big dick energy, honestly. Gotta give it to him. Either way, back in June of 1941, a group of Soviet anthropologists went to his burial tomb in Uzbekistan hoping to exhume his body. When they finally got there and opened the doors, they found a chilling message inscribed on his tomb. When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble. And it also said, whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I. And boy, oh boy, was he not wrong. 3 days after his tomb was opened, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, and so the whole invader more terrible than I was most definitely true. But then get this, after hearing about the situation, Stalin ordered the body to be reburied, and then days after that, Soviet forces won against German forces when they liberated Stalingrad. So I feel like Tamerlane's curse was very much alive when all this was going on. Russia and Germany were like, no, you bury him, no, you bring him back out, no, you bury him, no, you bring him back out. This guy's body was what decided the fate of World War II, I just wanted to let you know. It wasn't Hitler, it wasn't the Axis Allies powers, it was none of that. And finally, at number 1 is the God of Death. Ominous, I know. So back in 1971, which is like semi-recent considering the other dates on this list, a group of men led by Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery were doing a dig in Saqqara. The group came upon a hidden tomb in a deep hole, and inside it was the statue of Osiris, the god of death. The statue wasn't even that big, it was like less than 20 centimeters long max, and the worker quickly gave it to Emery, who took it to his dig house. He then went to take a shower, but a few minutes later his assistant heard some strange moaning noise coming from the house. He went in and knocked on the bathroom door but got no answer. Getting slightly worried now, he went inside to find Emery clutching the basin for dear life, unable to move with a horrid look of trauma on his face. His assistant had to physically grab him by the shoulders, drag him to the couch, and then call an ambulance. The diagnosis was pretty clear. Emery was completely paralyzed from the right side and became unable to speak, and sadly died the next day out of literally nowhere. His team and wife believe the tomb was cursed, whereas I believe if you're finding the god of death hidden somewhere deep down in the desert, you can't possibly be surprised that you yourself was met with death very quickly later.
Coming in at number 10, we have William Shakespeare's grave. Billy Bob Shakespeare is one of my favourite historical figures of all time for many reasons, but mainly because I loved his drama. William Shakespeare died in 1616 and wrote 39 plays, 154 sonnets, and 2 long narrative poems. My favourite Shakespeare play is probably The Winter's Tale. It's a classic problem play and I really enjoy it, but I also do love Macbeth as a close second. So as we know, the famous English writer had a flair for drama, drama, and a great sense of humour. With that in mind, of course he decided to place a curse on his grave. He's buried at the Holy Trinity Church in his home of Stratford-upon-Avon. On his grave he wrote, "Good friends, for love's sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be man spares these stones, and cursed be he who moves my bones." Good on you, Bill. You don't want anyone messing with your bones, I feel you. When the church was restored in 2008, care was taken to keep his bones safe. I might just curse my own grave so that I don't end up getting thrown out in the trash. Good thinking.
Moving on to number 9 now, we have the Hope Diamond. This is one of the most famous diamonds in the world, a 45.52 carat piece that has been owned by a number of famous people over the years, going right back to King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, who owned it during the French Revolution and their beheadings after. They weren't the only deaths that legend has linked to the diamond though. They say that a tragedy befalls anyone who owns or wears it. Here are some random owners that I've just plucked out from a long list. Jacques Collet bought it and later committed suicide. Prince Ivan Kantinovsky was the next owner before being killed by Russian revolutionists. The original merchant who brought the diamond from India to Paris was later torn to pieces by wild dogs in Constantinople. This list of gore, misery and death just goes on and on. The last person to privately own the diamond was a woman called Evelyn McLean. She had her daughter die of an overdose and her son died in a car crash. Of course, these could all be just random tragic events. Some even say the stories were fabricated to add to the mystique of the diamond. But either way, the blood diamond now sits behind glass at the Smithsonian Museum. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the Lost Dutchman's Mine. Now according to legend, there is a vast and plentiful gold mine hidden somewhere in southwest USA. If you want me to be more specific, they say it's somewhere in the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix, Arizona. In the 1840s, the Peralta family of northern Mexico supposedly developed rich gold mines in those mountains. They kept the location very secret though, and when they were supposedly killed by the Apache tribe, the secret of the mine's location died with them. Today, the area is known as the Massacre Grounds. A few decades later, a German man called Jacob Waltz set out to look for the mine. They called him the Dutchman. Now he tracked down one of the descendants of the family to help him find the mine. He and his partner Jacob Weiser worked the mine. There was more gold than they could ever imagine. They supposedly hid some caches of gold in the mountains. According to the story, Weiser was killed by the Apache tribe and Waltz died in Phoenix some 20 years later. He supposedly passed the knowledge of the mine's location onto his neighbor who cared for him before he died. Neither she nor other treasure hunters over the years have been successful in finding the mine. Many of them have met mysterious deaths during the search, leading to the legend of the Lost Dutchman and the cursed treasure he found. Moving on to number 7 now, we have CAHUENGA Pass. In 1964, a shepherd named Diego Marino told people he had found treasure in the mountains near Los Angeles. Today, the area is called CAHUENGA Pass and also Whitley Heights. The treasure was immense, more than $200,000 worth of gold, diamonds and pearls. They had been left there on the trail by 4 agents from Mexico. They planned to exchange them for guns to aid a political struggle in Mexico, but before they'd reached their destination, one of the agents suddenly died in a mysterious death. The other agent suspected French spies were trying to bump them off one by one, so they split the treasure up and hid it in the hills. When they found out that the treasure had been stolen, they blamed each other. A fight broke out and 2 of the agents killed each other. Another agent died later while breaking up a bar fight. Meanwhile, the shepherd was in a tavern on his way to LA to sell his new treasure. That night he had a nightmare in which he entered LA with the treasure and died. He decided the next morning to bury it under a large ash tree. The shepherd fell ill though on the rest of his journey. His friend cared for him as he died. The shepherd's final words were to tell his friend where the treasure was buried so that he could have it. Soon after though, his friend had violent convulsions and he also died. He was buried by his son and his friend. They did manage to locate the treasure, but as you can probably guess by now, one of them had convulsions and died when they were digging. The other then just ran for his life. They say the treasure still remains there to this day, buried under an ash tree along the CAHUENGA Pass. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the cursed dollars. In 2011, a 49-year-old man from Illinois found a bag containing $150,000 in his garden while he was picking broccoli. He told police and turned the bag over to them on the understanding that if the money was not claimed by anyone else by the end of 2012, it would be his. Eventually, his 87-year-old neighbour staked a claim. Before she died in January 2013, the woman, who suffered from dementia, told the court that she had gotten rid of the money because it was cursed. The court decided to give the bulk of the money to the woman's daughter and give the man a small finder's fee. However, just 10 days before he was set to collect his money, he died suddenly from diabetic problems after waiting 2 years for his share. Curse or tragic timing. At the number 5 spot now we have the Money Pit. In 1795, 3 teenage boys stumbled across a man-made hole on Oak Island, just off the coast of Nova Scotia. Theories about who dug the hole range from Spanish sailors from a wrecked galleon to British troops fighting during the American Revolution. Whoever made it, legend says the hole has ancient treasure inside for anyone with the skills to retrieve it. So far, they have found wooden barriers, a strange layer of coconut husks, and a mysterious code written on a stone. It was deciphered and found to read 40 feet below, £2 million are buried. It's because of this that treasure hunters from all over the world have flocked to the island, hoping to be the ones to cash in, and many of them have met strange deaths. In 1861, a water pump exploded, killing a worker. In 1897, a man died in a pulley accident. In 1951, a team used a clamshell digger that fell off a barge and sunk. Most famously, in 1965, adventurer Robert Restall, his son and 2 of their co-workers died after inhaling poisonous gas while trapped in the hole. The Money Pit has claimed a number of victims over the years, and nobody is any closer to finding the treasure. Moving on from before now, we have the KOHINOOR diamond. Just like the blood diamond we talked about earlier, this is a very expensive, very famous diamond that has been blamed for a number of deaths over the years. They say there's records of this diamond going back 5,000 years in the Middle East. The curse was first mentioned in 1306 though. The 105 carat diamond came with a Hindu text that read, "He who owns this diamond will own the world, but will also know all its misfortunes. Only God or a woman can wear it with impunity." So there you go, for any of you females watching, the curse won't affect you. Also, that's true if God is watching this video. It won't affect you either. It was stolen by the British in the 1800s. Queen Victoria had it cut up into small diamonds, some of which can be seen in the coronation crown of the Queen Mother. Is this a nod to the fact that a male can never wear the diamond? Perhaps. Do we have any volunteers watching to test out the theory? Next up at number 3 now, we have Charles Island. This island is located off the coast of Milford in Connecticut. They say that the whole island has been cursed not once, not twice, but 3 times in history. Thrice. According to legend, the first curse came in 1639 when the Paugussett tribe chief traded it to the European settlers, but not before cursing it over their kidnapping of his daughter. 60 years later, Scottish pirate Captain William Kidd was lured to the island in a trap that led to his trial and execution. He apparently cursed the island that led to his downfall. Fast forward to 1721 and a group of Connecticut sailors stumbled across some treasure in Mexico that belonged to an Aztec emperor called Guatemotzin. The sailors brought it back home to Connecticut, but soon after, disaster befell them that led to the death of 4 out of 5 of their group. The last man panicked, believing the treasure to be cursed, and buried it on Charles Island. In the years since, many treasure hunters have tried and failed to retrieve the cursed treasure, and locals blame the cursed island for the lack of any humans settling there in all this time. Next up at number 2 now, we have the curse of the Amber Room. Have you ever heard of the 8th wonder of the world? That's what people used to call this room. It was a gift to Peter the Great in 1716, celebrating peace between Russia and Prussia. It was covered floor to ceiling in gold and jewels. The walls were made of pure amber. Fast forward to World War II, and the Nazis managed to take control of the building and the room. Then they took the room. No, really. They took it. They took it apart and carried it bit by bit back to Germany. After the war was over, nobody knew where it was exactly. Some say it was buried in the mountains, others say the Nazis stole a fake one and that the Russians still have the real one. Either way, there is apparently a curse attached to the whole thing, supposedly. The curator of the room while the KGB investigated the case died of typhoid. An investigator was killed in a car crash after talking about it. A famous Amber Room hunter was mysteriously murdered in a forest and beginning to think that this room doesn't want to be found. And finally at number 1 now, we have Qin Shi Huang's tomb. Qin Shi Huang is known as China's first emperor. When he died in 210 BC, his tomb was filled with everything that his people felt was appropriate for a man of his standing. This included hundreds of slaves, concubines, gold and jewels, as well as thousands of terracotta soldier statues. They make up what is now known as the Terracotta Army. As you can see from these pictures, the area is huge and a lot of it has actually been excavated, except for one area. To this day, the mausoleum which actually holds the emperor's body is off limits to all. Well, the official line is that the site is surrounded by a thick river of mercury which could easily kill excavators who are not too careful. Others say that this is just a cover story and that the tomb and its final treasures are protected by an ancient curse. There are writings that talk about a number of booby traps to protect the area. Are the scientists put off by the thought of this too? Either way, of all the treasures we've looked at so far, Qin Shi Huang's might actually remain untouched.